Mark Henderson stood on the empty platform of a small railway station in the outskirts of the city. It was almost midnight, and the urban hustle and bustle had long since quieted. The only sound breaking the silence was a faint wind playing with fallen leaves. He glanced at his watch in frustration. The train he was waiting for was already 10 minutes late. There wasn't a soul around, and the platform looked almost abandoned. "Damn it," Mark muttered, pulling out his phone to check the schedule. No signal. Of course now. The platform light flickered as if trying to warn him of something. Mark felt a strange unease. A chill crept over him, and he zipped up his jacket, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that someone was watching him. Then he heard a horn. In the distance, headlights emerged from the darkness, illuminating the tracks ahead. The train's carriages looked strange. Old, covered in dust and rust, surrounded by a faint white mist. The train stopped with a quiet screech. The doors opened, but inside there was nothing visible except a dim, soft light. "Is this my train?" Mark muttered, looking around for any station staff. There was no one. He stepped forward, peering into the carriage. It looked like any other train, only much older, as if it belonged to a different era. Everything inside was covered in a layer of dust, and the air smelled of dampness. A voice whispered from afar, "Step inside." Mark froze. "Who's there?" There was no response. Tired of waiting, he stepped into the carriage. The doors closed behind him with a dull thud, and the train began to move. Mark sat on one of the old leather seats, its cracked material creaking under his weight, and tried to calm himself. He decided this must have been an extra train added to compensate for delays. His attention was drawn to a strange sensation that he wasn't alone. On the opposite side of the carriage, several passengers sat silently. Their faces were partially obscured by hats, hoods, or shadows. Mark glanced around, trying to get a better look at them. "Excuse me, is this train heading to Central Station?" he asked. No one answered. The passengers didn't move. Mark stood up and walked closer to one of them. It was a woman with a pale face and lifeless, faded eyes. She looked as though she had been sitting there for years. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The woman abruptly turned her head toward him. Her mouth opened, but instead of a scream, a metallic screech came out, like nails on a chalkboard. In horror, Mark stumbled back, tripping over the edge of a seat. The other passengers began to stir. Their faces were distorted like ghosts, with empty eye sockets and twisted jaws. "This can't be real." From the far end of the carriage came the sound of heavy footsteps. Mark turned and saw a figure slowly approaching him. It was a man in an old, worn conductor's uniform. His face was hidden beneath a peaked cap, but sunken cheekbones peeked out from under it. The conductor stopped near Mark and slowly extended a hand. "Ticket," he said in a raspy voice. Mark shivered. I don't have a ticket." The conductor leaned in closer, his dark, hollow eyes seemingly peering straight into Mark's soul. "Then you'll pay another way." "What do you mean? What do you want?" "Your memories," the conductor replied. Before Mark could respond, the train suddenly jolted to a stop. He fell to the floor, sparks raining down around him. When he got up, all the passengers had vanished. The carriage was empty, but the air felt dense, as though it was filled with a fog of foreign thoughts. The whispers grew louder, now forming fragments of phrases like snippets of conversations. "These are your memories, Mark," the conductor's voice boomed. Mark turned. The conductor was no longer human. His facial features had disappeared, leaving a smooth, featureless surface, like a mask. An eerie aura emanated from him, draining the warmth from the air. "Why me?" Mark asked, barely able to stand. "What do you want from me?" "It's not a question, it's the truth." The conductor pointed to the window. Mark looked outside. Instead of a nightscape, he saw scenes from his own life. In one window, his childhood, hiding under the bed while his parents argued. In another, his teenage years, standing alone in the school parking lot as classmates laughed at him. The windows continued to show memories. One struck him particularly hard. A year ago, he had abandoned his brother Liam, leaving him to deal with his problems alone. Mark had known Liam was in trouble but decided it wasn't his responsibility. A month later, Liam was dead. "No, stop," Mark shouted, turning away. "This won't stop until you face it," the conductor replied. "You are a passenger on this train for a reason." Mark ran to the door, trying to open it, but it was locked tight. The memories in the windows began to come alive, invisible hands reaching out to grab him and pull him back into the past. "We all pay for what we hide," the conductor continued. "You can't escape." The air around Mark thickened, as though he was drowning in his own memories. His breathing became erratic, and the screams from the past grew louder. "Please tell me how to get out," he begged, falling to his knees. "There is no way out," the conductor said coldly. "You put yourself on this train." The train finally began to slow. Outside the windows was nothing but darkness, but Mark could feel the train approaching something. He didn't know what, but his heart pounded with fear. When the train stopped, the doors opened with a soft creak. Beyond them lay an empty, desolate station shrouded in thick fog. On the platform was a sign, but the letters were blurred, as if they had been erased countless times. "Where am I?" Mark asked, looking at the conductor. "You already know." Mark stepped out of the carriage hesitantly, his feet hitting the cold, cracked tiles of the platform. Around him, there was nothing. No light, no sound, only a void that pressed in from all sides. He approached the edge of the platform and looked down. Where the tracks should have been was an endless black abyss, into which the fog seemed to flow. "Do you want me to jump?" Mark shouted, turning to the conductor. The conductor stood silently by the train doors, holding a pocket watch whose hands moved backward. "It's your choice," he said. The platform began to change. The ground cracked, revealing the void below, and ghostly figures, like the passengers from the carriage, started to appear. Their faces were distorted, and they seemed to be trying to speak to Mark, but only the sound of rushing wind came from their mouths. Mark screamed, covering his ears. He thought he saw his brother Liam among the figures. "Liam, is that you?" The figure turned. Its face resembled Liam's, but it was only a phantom. It extended a hand to Mark, who, without thinking, grabbed it. Suddenly, the platform disappeared and he found himself in the void, surrounded by whispers. Mark woke up lying on a cold stone surface. Around him was a crowd of lost souls like himself. Each had a distorted face, reflecting the suffering they had hidden in life. He tried to speak to one of them, but his voice was swallowed by the silence. The conductor appeared before him, once again in his human guise. "Welcome," he said. "Where am I?" Mark asked weakly. "In the place you chose yourself. You are now part of the train. You will remain a passenger until someone else takes your place." Mark wanted to protest, but he felt something pulling at him from within. He no longer felt alive. His thoughts slowed, his memories faded, and soon he became one of those who had once stared at him with empty eyes in the carriage. And the ghost train continued its journey, heading nowhere, collecting new passengers who dared to board.